What happens when one of television's most respected actors reaches his breaking point live on air? That question was answered one unforgettable night when Bob Odenkirk, the acclaimed actor best known for portraying Saul Goodman, found himself in a confrontation that left both the audience and social media stunned. The night began like any other episode of The Tonight Show. The studio buzzed with pre-show excitement as Odenkirk prepared to promote his latest project. Everything seemed normal until the cameras started rolling. Jimmy Fallon, known for his upbeat energy and sometimes over-the-top enthusiasm, was in especially high spirits. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the incredible Bob Odenkirk," he announced, grinning widely. Bob walked out to applause, waving politely, though those familiar with him might have sensed something slightly off. He seemed reserved, measured, even cautious as he took his seat. "Bob, great to see you, man," Jimmy said, leaning forward for an energetic handshake. "Thanks for being here tonight." Bob nodded, replying in a calm tone that contrasted Jimmy's exuberance. The interview began smoothly enough until Jimmy leaned in with a mischievous glint in his eye. "So, Bob, I heard through the grapevine that you've got some strong opinions about where comedy is heading these days. Care to share with our audience?" Bob hesitated slightly before answering. Comedy, like any art form, goes through different phases, some good, some not so much. But Jimmy pressed on. "Oh, come on, Bob. I heard you were pretty critical of some of the younger comedians. Something about them not paying their dues." The air in the studio seemed to shift. Bob's jaw tightened. "I think there might be some confusion there, Jimmy. I've always been supportive of new talent. In fact, I mentor a lot of younger performers." Jimmy smirked, his tone light but edged with provocation. "Didn't you say in that Entertainment Weekly interview that a lot of comedians today are just riding social media fame instead of developing their craft?" Bob blinked, visibly annoyed. "I never gave that interview," he replied coolly. "Where exactly did you get that information?" The audience began to sense the growing tension. Jimmy stumbled for a beat, then tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was another magazine. "But you do have thoughts about comedy today, right?" "I'm not sure what you're trying to get at," Bob said evenly. "If you want to ask about my work or my real opinions, I'm happy to discuss that. Otherwise, I'd prefer not to respond to statements I never made." Jimmy forced a laugh. "Relax, Bob, we're just having fun here. No need to get defensive." Bob's tone sharpened. "I'm not being defensive, Jimmy. I'm being accurate. There's a difference." The crowd began to murmur, realizing this was no longer just another lighthearted chat. Jimmy tried to steer things back toward humor. "Come on, man, it's just entertainment." That was the breaking point. Bob leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. "Just entertainment?" he repeated. "Do you have any idea how much damage careless statements like that can do to someone's reputation in this industry?" Jimmy blinked, clearly taken aback. "Bob, I think you're overreacting." Odenkirk's eyes locked on him. "Overreacting? You just accused me of bad-mouthing young comedians based on an interview that doesn't exist. Then when I correct you, you call me defensive and tell me to lighten up. That's not how you treat people." The studio was silent now, the tension thick enough to cut. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion on both men's faces. Jimmy, struggling to maintain his trademark charm, offered a strained smile. But Bob's expression had hardened. Without another word, he unclipped his mic, stood up and walked off stage. The audience gasped. The stunned silence that followed would be replayed endlessly across social media. Clips dissected, motives debated, reputations questioned. What was supposed to be a routine late-night interview had instead become one of the most talked-about moments in television history. This was no longer a standard celebrity interview. It had become something raw, unpredictable, and deeply uncomfortable. Bob Odenkirk leaned forward in his chair, his voice steady but edged with frustration. "Jimmy, let me ask you something," he said, locking eyes with the host. "Did you or your producers actually do any research for this interview? Or did you just decide to wing it and hope for the best?" The question hit hard. Jimmy Fallon's trademark smile faltered, replaced by a look of visible discomfort. "Bob, I think we should maybe move on to talking about your new project," he offered carefully. But Bob wasn't ready to let it go. "No, Jimmy, I don't think we should move on. I think we should address what just happened here." The studio fell into a heavy silence. Even the audience, usually quick to laugh or applaud, seemed to realize something had gone seriously wrong. Jimmy, known for his easy charm and ability to keep things light, looked unsettled. He was in uncharted territory, facing one of television's most respected actors. And that actor was clearly done playing along. "Bob, look, I'm sorry if there was some miscommunication," Jimmy said, his tone wavering as he tried to regain control. "Maybe we got some bad information from our research team." Bob's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Maybe you got bad information? Jimmy? You just spent 5 minutes trying to get me to defend positions I never took based on interviews I never gave. That's not miscommunication. That's irresponsible." Jimmy's hands began to fidget, a nervous tic familiar to longtime viewers. "Come on, Bob," he said, forcing a laugh. "This kind of thing happens all the time in interviews. We're just trying to create some interesting conversation here." Bob shook his head slowly, his tone measured but cutting. "Interesting conversation? Do you understand the difference between an interesting conversation and ambush journalism? Because what you just did falls squarely into the latter category." The camera zoomed in, capturing every flicker of tension as producers behind the scenes scrambled, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the drama unfold live. "Bob, I think you're really blowing this out of proportion," Jimmy said defensively. "I was just asking some questions." "You were asking loaded questions based on fabricated premises," Bob shot back. "There's a huge difference. And the fact that you don't seem to understand that is concerning for someone who interviews people for a living." The host's face was now flushed, his easygoing demeanor slipping away. "Look, Bob, I don't know what your problem is tonight, but you're being incredibly hostile for no reason." Bob's composure cracked for the first time, his voice rising slightly. "No reason? You just called my legitimate concerns about journalistic integrity hostile behavior. Do you hear yourself right now?" Jimmy let out a short, bitter laugh. "Journalistic integrity? Bob, this is a comedy show. We're not doing investigative reporting here." That was the final straw. Bob stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor as the entire studio held its breath. "A comedy show," he repeated, towering over Jimmy, who remained seated. "Jimmy, just because you tell jokes doesn't mean you get to abandon basic professional standards. You have millions of people watching this show. What you say matters." Jimmy's voice was softer now, tinged with concern. "Bob, please sit down. Let's just—" But Bob cut him off, his voice firm and unwavering. "No, Jimmy, I don't think I will sit down. Because the audience deserves to understand what just happened here. You invited me onto your show under the pretense of promoting my work. But instead you tried to manufacture controversy using false information." The crowd was utterly silent. No laughter, no applause, only the quiet hum of the cameras. Bob's voice carried across the studio, calm but forceful. "You want to know what I really think about the state of comedy, Jimmy? I think it's being damaged by exactly this kind of irresponsible content. The idea that you can just throw anything at the wall and see what sticks, regardless of whether it's true or fair to the people involved." Jimmy's expression was tense, his tone pleading now. "Bob, I think there's been a real misunderstanding here." But Bob shook his head. "No, Jimmy, there hasn't. What's happened here tonight wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate attempt to create drama at my expense. And when I called you out on it, you doubled down instead of apologizing." "I did apologize," Jimmy protested weakly. "You offered a non-apology," Bob corrected sharply. "You said maybe there was miscommunication, maybe you got bad information. That's not an apology. That's an excuse." The air in the studio was electric, a mix of tension, disbelief, and awkward fascination. The cameras kept rolling, capturing a moment that would soon dominate headlines and social media feeds across the world. What began as a simple late-night interview had transformed into a live reckoning about truth, responsibility, and the thin line between entertainment and exploitation. "That's not taking responsibility, Jimmy. That's deflecting it." Bob Odenkirk's words hung in the air, slicing through the heavy tension that had consumed the Tonight Show studio. Crew members exchanged uncertain glances, unsure how to handle the unfolding disaster. The silence was thick enough to feel. Bob's tone dropped, calm and conversational again, which only made his words land harder. "Let me ask you something, Jimmy. How would you feel if you went on someone else's show and they spent the entire interview trying to get you to defend things you never said or did?" Jimmy hesitated, clearly unsure of how to respond. Bob waited, eyes fixed on him. "I'm waiting for an answer, Jimmy," he pressed, "because I think our audience would love to hear your thoughts on that." Jimmy finally muttered almost under his breath. I'd probably be upset. Bob nodded slowly. You'd be upset, and you'd have every right to be upset, wouldn't you? Yes, Jimmy admitted quietly. So why is it different when it's happening to me? Bob asked, his tone cutting but steady. Why am I being labeled unreasonable for reacting the same way you just said you would? Jimmy had no reply. His silence spoke louder than words. You know what's really disappointing about all this, Jimmy? Bob continued, his voice softening into something that almost sounded like sadness. I've been in this business over 30 years. I've done hundreds of interviews, with prepared hosts, unprepared hosts, awkward hosts, but never once have I sat across from someone who deliberately misrepresented my views and then acted like I was the problem for objecting. His words hung in the air like a physical weight. Jimmy Fallon, one of the most successful late-night hosts on television, looked smaller now, shaken, humbled, and completely out of his element. The audience sat frozen in uneasy silence. Bob stood beside his chair, clearly debating whether to stay or walk off, while Jimmy fumbled for a way to salvage what was left of the moment. Bob, he finally said, his voice trembling, I really think we should try to work this out. Maybe we can start over. Bob looked at him with a mix of disbelief and disappointment. Start over? You think you can just reset this like it's a video game? After everything that just happened? Jimmy leaned forward slightly, desperation creeping into his tone. I'm just trying to make this right. You want to make this right? Bob asked firmly. Then maybe you should start by acknowledging what went wrong instead of trying to move past it, like it never happened. Jimmy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I already said there might have been some miscommunication, he offered weakly. Bob exhaled sharply, shaking his head. There's that word again, might. Jimmy, do you actually believe this was a miscommunication? Or are you just hoping that if you keep saying it enough times, everyone will accept that version of events? The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of this extraordinary confrontation. Across the country, viewers sat transfixed, witnessing something entirely unprecedented on late-night television. Jimmy's face was flushed, his posture rigid. Bob, I don't know, he finally blurted out, his frustration starting to show. What do you want me to say? Bob's response was calm but firm. I want you to tell the truth. Jimmy, I want you to admit that either your research team gave you false information, which would be a professional failure on their part, or you decided to stir up controversy that never existed. Which one is it? Jimmy fell silent again, visibly struggling to respond. I think maybe there was some confusion in our preparation process, he finally offered weakly. Confusion? Bob repeated flatly, his expression tightening. Jimmy, do you even hear yourself? You're a professional interviewer with an entire team behind you. Either they provided you with fabricated information about me, which is a serious issue, or you chose to present false information for the sake of drama. There is no middle ground called confusion. The silence that followed was deafening. Jimmy looked around helplessly as if searching for support from the audience or his crew, but none came. Bob straightened, his tone quiet but final. You know what, Jimmy? I think I have my answer. Your inability to give a straight response tells me everything I need to know about how seriously you take your responsibility as an interviewer. Jimmy reached out slightly, his voice breaking with tension. Bob, please what, Jimmy? Bob interrupted sharply, his eyes burning with conviction. Please pretend this didn't happen. Please help you rewrite the narrative so you come out looking better. Or please let you turn this train wreck into content for your show. His voice was steady, but there was steel in every syllable. The audience remained utterly silent, the cameras still rolling, capturing what would go down as one of the most uncomfortable and unforgettable TO moments in late-night television history. Bob Odenkirk's voice was calm, but unwavering as he looked directly at Jimmy Fallon. I've spent my entire career building a reputation based on honesty and integrity, he said. I'm not going to compromise that to help you out of a situation you created. The color drained from Jimmy's face. I never asked you to compromise anything, he muttered, but Bob didn't let him off the hook. You asked me to defend statements I never made. You asked me to participate in a conversation built on false premises. And when I objected, you told me I was overreacting. That is asking me to compromise my integrity. The tension in the studio was unbearable. Crew members exchanged uncertain glances as instructions came crackling in through their earpieces, some saying to cut to commercial, others to let it play out. No one knew what to do. Bob took a breath and continued, his voice taking on a quieter, almost instructive tone. Jimmy, let me give you some advice. This business is built on trust. Trust between performers and audiences. Trust between guests and hosts. Trust between professionals. What happened here tonight damaged that trust, and the way you've handled it has made it worse. I'm really sorry this happened, Jimmy said finally, and for the first time, his words carried real sincerity instead of the polished charm of a talk show host. Bob nodded slightly. I believe you are sorry, Jimmy, he said. But being sorry after the fact doesn't undo the damage, and it doesn't address the problem that led us here. Jimmy looked confused. What problem? He asked. Bob didn't hesitate. The problem is that you think your job as an interviewer is to create entertainment, no matter the cost, even if it means twisting facts or misrepresenting your guests. That's not interviewing, Jimmy, that's exploitation. The word landed like a slap. Jimmy flinched, his voice cracking as he protested, That's not fair. Bob's response was firm. Isn't it? You brought me here under false pretenses, tried to get me to respond to fabricated controversies, and when I called you out, you made me the problem. How is that not exploitation? The silence that followed was devastating. Even the audience, caught between shock and discomfort, couldn't muster a reaction. Then Bob turned to the camera. To everyone watching at home, he said clearly, I came here tonight excited to talk about my work and to have a genuine conversation with Jimmy. That's not what happened, and I think you all deserve to understand why. He turned back to Jimmy, his tone softening slightly. I hope you learned something from this, Jimmy. I hope you take a good look at how your show operates, and because if you don't, this won't be the last time something like this happens. Without another word, Bob stood up and began walking toward the edge of the stage. The cameras followed as he moved with quiet dignity, the studio still frozen in disbelief. Bob, wait, Jimmy called out desperately, but Bob didn't look back. He reached the curtain, paused for a brief moment, turned toward the audience and gave a small, respectful nod before disappearing backstage. Jimmy sat at his desk, visibly shaken, the weight of what had just unfolded pressing down on him. The audience remained in stunned silence, unsure whether to clap, gasp, or simply sit frozen in awe of what they'd just witnessed. It was a moment that would echo through late-night television history. Bob Odenkirk's walk-off wasn't just a reaction to a bad interview. It was a stand for truth, professionalism, and integrity. In the aftermath, commentators and fans would debate endlessly. Was Bob right to walk away, or should he have tried to mend things on air? Whatever the answer, one thing was certain. Television would never quite be the same after that night.